Beautiful people, all praises to the King of Heaven. All right, the Hoopoe. The Hoopoe bird, with its distinctive head crest, has a long history as a symbolic, spiritual high praise, bringing valuable secret knowledge to mankind. The Hoopoe was also a diviner of knowledge to the prophet King Solomon, able to reveal the presence of secret springs and wells. And when we read more about the story of the Hoopoe and King Solomon, you'll see why. Also, this is from ancient history, engravings of the Hoopoe in Israel, right? And that's the crown. And you're going to see why the Hoopoe's crown goes up and down after we get into the story. So this is the Hoopoe's crown up. This is the crown down. Now let's get into natural history. So this book is called, let me zoom in a bit. Okay, this book is called The Illustrated Natural History of Birds. Okay. The common hoopoe enjoys a very wide range of country, being found in northern Africa, where its principal home is generally stationed in several parts of Asia and nearly the whole of Europe. On account of its member, Israelites ruled Europe, northern part of Africa. Israelites ruled northern part of Africa. On account of its very striking and remarkable form, it has attracted much notice and has been the subject of innumerable legends and strange tales, nearly all which relate to its feathery crest. Okay, now let's go. It is related that Solomon was once journeying across the desert and was fainting with heat when a large flock of hoopoes came to his assistance, and by flying between the sun and the monarch formed a impenetrable cloud with their wings and bodies. Grateful for their ready help, Solomon asked the birds what reward they would choose in return for their services. After some consultation among themselves, the hoopoes answered that they would like each bird to be decorated with a golden crown. And in spite of Solomon's advice, they persisted in their requests and received their crowns accordingly. For a few days they were justly proud of their golden decorations, and strutted among the less favored birds with great exultation. Now let's go to the story where this story is. Okay, there's a story called The Birds Who Befriended King Solomon. This is it. This is how the Hoopoes came to know the great King Solomon. Once he was far out in the wilderness, for there was no part of his kingdom that Solomon did not visit. He had seen the great store city which finished to his liking, even Tadmor in the desert, and across the sand the king's cavalcade made its way, and the camels and the dromedaries and the broidered saddled cloths, bright as flowers, and jeweled bridles, flashing as brightly as the sun itself. But the heat smote down on Solomon's head, and Solomon yearned for shade, as if in answer to his longing. Who should appear but a flock of hoopoes? Being curious by nature, they circled around until they reached the king's camel, and kept just overhead, so that they might watch this most famous of all monarchs, and perchance overhear some words of wisdom. So the birds already knew about Solomon being the wisest man. Now, this is why you have to read stories. Thus the little birds cast a grateful shade over the king for his whole journey, and richly repaid they were. For Solomon, always polite to the humblest creature in his kingdom, conversed freely with them during the whole time. And another thing, you gotta know, Solomon loved birds. When they reached his palace, he thanked them for their service they had done him, and asked what he could do in return. Now the Hopos had begun their conversation with Solomon modestly enough. In fact, they had been very surprised that he had spoken to them at all, but he had questioned them so kindly about their ways of living and their likes and preferences and relations. Ask the birds, and they shall tell thee that they lost their fear of him. And they came to this wonderful palace, and saw all the servants in their shiny robes standing behind the king's throne, and waiting at his table, and lining the great courtyard. And when they beheld the walls of ivory inlaid with gold, and the golden lions guarding the steps, and the white peacocks on the silver terraces, it quite turned their heads to think they had sojourneyed right across the desert with the owner of all these riches. So instead of answering Solomon with thanks or their part and telling him his words of wisdom were rich reward for any shelter they had given, the Hopos begged leave to consult together and withdrew to the palace roof where they discussed what they would ask for. Finally, they decided they would like golden crowns, such as the king himself wore. Then they could return to the other birds and reign over them. Thereupon the little birds flew down with a rush and made their request to the king as he walked in his wonderful garden. What the king has said, Solomon replied. The gift you desire shall be granted, yet because you rendered me true service when you wish to get rid of your crowns, you may return and exchange them for wisdom. So you hear what Solomon said to the birds? When you get tired of your crowns, you can come back and you can exchange them for wisdom. Nay, king, said the Hopos. Well, we know that wisdom has brought you great renown, but no one would bow down to you or give attention to your words unless you wore your golden crown. We shall be able to repeat your wise words profitably now, for all will listen when they see golden crowns on our heads too. All the same, return to me without fear or shame if your crowns do not satisfy, said King Solomon kindly, and ordered his goldsmiths to supply the Hopos with crowns of the finest gold procurable. Off flew the silly little birds, therefore, with the shining crowns upon their heads, prouder than the peacocks, and chattering more louder than the parrots and macaws. They could scarcely wait to get back to their friends and hear their exclamations. But when the Hopos informed their friends they were now kings of the bird world, their friends only laughed and said they were quite satisfied with Solomon being king, and he was the only king they wished or needed. Then they drove the Hopos from the trees, for their golden crowns were always catching in the branches, and the other birds became tired of helping them out. But the Hopos decided the other birds were jealous, and rather flattered, gathered round the pool so that they could admire themselves in the water. Very soon people began to notice the queer antics of the silly little things as they strutted up and down, cocking their heads, first this side, then that, and finally a man caught one and discovered the wonderful golden crown it wore. He herded it off with it to a goldsmith, who gave him so high a price for it that the man rushed back to the pool and laid snares for the Hopos, who were so taken up with admiring themselves that they walked straight into them. Then came the saddest time for the Hopos. Everyone began to hunt them. The poor little birds could not go to the wells and the pools, for they were thick with nets. They could not go into the gardens, for fowlers lurked behind the fowlers. They could not fly up onto the housetops, for even there the people had set traps for them. There did not seem a spot on the earth where they could rest. And at last the wrenched little birds flew back to the palace and waited till they beheld the great King Solomon coming along his terrace, listening to his singers as they performed in the cool of the evening. O king, said they, we have found that the golden crowns are vanity. We know not what you do to keep yourself from being chased about and hunted, and so we have come to ask you to remove ours from us. Beloved Hopos, said the king, a crown that people are expected to bow to always sits heavy on the head, and a crown that excites envy is a net for the feet. The only crown that can be worn with comfort is the crown of service, and that crown should